cheap solar power, batteries, and electric vehicles are changing the transport and energy sector as we know. I bring in guests to this podcast who will help you with their ideas to navigate this energy transition.
By the way, this episode is also available as a video on our YouTube channel. Just search Energypreneurs.
Thank you for joining. Angus, good afternoon. After a bit of saga this morning, who you are, where are you?
Yeah, I'm in Sydney on the northern beaches. So God's own country, they call it up here. We only have 3 bridges in, so we're quite well defended on the peninsula, but also quite exposed to climate change. I'm Angus McDonald. I'm the co-founder and chair of MERC, the Maritime Emission Reduction Coalition. We're a regional innovation cluster based in the Australian, New Zealand kind of region. We deal with people that are mainly operating or selling into the Australian region. And what we're all about is how do we accelerate maritime decarbonisation?
Wow.
How do we help that happen? And how do we find where the real problems are and address them, where the real opportunities are too?
So are you working closely with the government?
I would like to say yes. Our government's dragging their feet a little bit around maritime decarbonisation. There's a Maritime Emission Reduction National Action Plan, or MERNAP. You can see why we call it MERNAP. And MERNAP actually was the inspiration for the name MERC, because we thought it'd be great to work hand in glove with government. But MERNAP has been delayed. We're not even sure when it's coming. It might have come a year ago. It was ready probably a year ago. And then it got caught up in the federal election. A bunch of other things happened. And we have the IMO's net zero framework getting pushed away for a year. And I suspect that's probably going to cause a few problems for the domestic agenda, just because we wanted the domestic rules to not be so different from the international rules, that they create a kind of
step. Can we get a bit more specific what you mean?
Yeah, when you talk about vessels on the water, we typically talk about domestic commercial vessels, and I'm going to talk commercial because recreational is a different kettle of fish. But you have domestic commercial vessels, which are ones that operate in Australia's domestic waters. They don't go internationally, or they rarely go internationally. Vessels that go internationally, or they're international vessels operating in Australia, are governed by the International Maritime Organization, the UN's body that meets and has rules. And those rules have been implemented by countries that have signed up to the IMO.
Okay.
So we've signed up to the IMO rules. So Australia has certain rules that we do for large ships that come here from overseas, for instance, or even for super yachts. Sometimes chartered super yachts come from overseas. And they're different than the rules we have for domestic commercial vessels. MERNAP is intended to apply domestically. It might apply to some vessels that are international vessels that are operating domestically. It does get complicated. And it will probably have some impact on vessels that come here. For example, there's a fuel excise that we charge road users on diesel, petrol. Interesting fact, when you're a visiting ship, you have to pay the fuel excise on the fuel reserves that you have in your ship at the time that you arrive in Australian waters. And then you deduct the difference when you leave Australian waters and you get that fuel excise back, which is a tricky way of making sure you don't import fuel in your hold and then sell it to people in Australia.
Interesting. But what does it apply to, say, commercial and vehicles operating within Australia? Let's keep the international aside.
Right.
Are there any targets at all?
There are no targets. There's no decarbonisation rules. There are federal and state targets that are supposed to apply. We've recently seen the federal government's net zero transport and infrastructure plan be delivered, and it specified how they were going to handle road transport and rail and a little bit about aviation. And when you came to the maritime bit, it said, MERNAP will handle the maritime bit, and kicked it down the road. So we're waiting to see what MERNAP says. It's been suggested that it might have a stick and a carrot approach. Certain levels you need to meet, or certain penalties you might receive, or costs you might have. And it might have some carrots to help people along the way. But right now, the industry doesn't know.
But if you operate a fleet of vans and side-by-side fleet of commercial boats, so the same technological impact would have happened if the batteries have become cheaper and the operating cost of those boats will be significantly lower, like an electric vehicle equivalent, no? So there should be enough commercial
To extent.
incentive.
So it
no?
depends what you're talking about. So I've done quite a lot of studies of the economics of this. If you take something like a ferry, which operates at a very high intensity, so it's operating 12 hours a day, often 360 or close to maybe 350 days a year, what you're looking at is there's a lot of costs where it would be cheaper to use a battery electric system. But the upfront CapEx cost is still much greater. The design of the vessel matters more. Most diesel vessels get away with overpowering the boats, so the engine's more powerful than it needs to be. The fuel tank's larger than it needs to be. Very difficult to compete with that excess power and that excess energy supply if you're going battery electric. But battery electric, you get torque far earlier, so you don't need to run. You're not wasting as much energy trying to get up on a plane, for instance, if you're a planing boat. And it's very efficient for slow moving vessels. So what we see is, yes, it does pay off over perhaps a 20-year lifespan, but it's that type of lifespan. And one of the interesting things is marinizing batteries costs quite a lot of money. The regulation in Australia, it's a little bit, mainly what it is actually is proving to the right people that your batteries are safe. So you typically go get type approval from a classification society. That means taking 3 of the batteries you have and destroying them. And so when you've got large batteries that might cost $50,000 each, and someone says, just destroy 3 of them for us to prove that nothing bad happens, engineering cost, and then there's time cost and consulting fees. And so people are like, hang on, that's $500,000 by the end of it, just to prove that my battery works in the maritime space. And so what happens is people marinize their batteries, but they're not as motivated as automotive batteries are to do a new version. They want to let that version that they've just tested and spent $500,000 on, they want to let that version go out there and actually sell quite a few numbers before they bother. And there's not as much electrification happening in the maritime space. So we're a little bit at the beginning stage where it costs a lot. It's a little hard to get batteries in there. And right now, some of the biggest expense is actually safety equipment. Because a truck, you can get a warning sign about your battery. You can stop the truck, step out of the truck, walk away from the truck, and stand there and go, wow, that was bad, as it goes up in smoke. On a boat, particularly a boat in the ocean, you're getting into the water, which isn't always safe to do to start with. And then you're waiting for someone to pick you up. It's not inherently a safe place. It's inherently a dangerous place. And so they're much more stringent about things like how long the battery can be burning before you have to exit the boat. And so you have to put large steel enclosures around it. That adds weight and it adds cost. And people are looking at what they can do to innovate around that. But I actually think what we're going to see happen is automotive battery tech get to the point where it's quite safe and stable. And we don't need that safety equipment. And the density is better. And the cost is better. And we're just going to see a number of things tick. And then battery electrification for boats, which already works in a number of instances, is just going to become much more universal.
It reminds me of the movie, I think, the Thunderbirds, right? 2, which had a belly, which was a separate thing. It picks up every time. Maybe you need one of those in case of emergency.
Yeah, definitely. Thunderbirds would be great. I definitely need an island that has a secret base. That's what we need for MERC.
And also eject the battery out so that the boat is safe.
That's interesting. There's been a Churchill Fellowship study done. So Churchill Fellowship is a study that Australians can do. You get about 6 to 8 weeks to travel the world and investigate things. And a man called Mike Hammond is from Marine Rescue New South Wales, which is a not-for-profit organisation that in New South Wales is responsible for marine safety. He traveled the world and went and talked to electric boat manufacturers and battery manufacturers and talked about this. And he actually identified that there's quite a few things that haven't been thought about. So if marine rescue comes to your boat and your boat seems to have a problem, if you've radioed for help or you're waving and going, help, I've got a problem. They come to you and go, what's the problem? You go, there's smoke coming out of my battery compartment. Now they've got no idea at this point. What does that mean? Like, how bad is that situation? How long do you have before the boat goes up in flames? And one of the things that's also scary for these guys is recreational boats don't have to meet the safety standards of commercial boats. So it might be that you've got moments before you have to get out of the boat. It might be that you've got an hour. It might be that you've got 5 minutes. So they're likely to say, abandon ship, get off the boat, create an exclusion zone and not let anyone near the boat, let your boat just burn down to the waterline because there's not a lot else that they can do. So there's some thinking that needs to happen there about, can they get the ability to query the battery status and find out from a distance, okay, I'm a first responder, you're giving out warning signs, I'm from a distance wirelessly asking you to tell me what's wrong, and they need a standard way of responding and giving you some detail. Because it might be perfectly safe to tow them back to harbour and to a marina and for them to take care of it, or it might be incredibly dangerous and the people should just get off the boat now.
Interesting. So the security, the whole safety aspects is creating an additional cost, which is making them immediately not so viable, and payback period is much longer.
Yeah, it does work for certain situations. So we've looked at a solar electric ferry. It works quite well. Mm-hmm. If you have a foiling ferry, so foiling vessels like the Candela P12 that can offer the ability to deploy in an area where you normally have wash constraints on speed, so they can go faster than a normal boat because they foil, they come out of the water, they use about 80% less energy at that speed. They're quite stable. They offer a more luxurious experience. So you're much less likely to get seasick in a Candela. But it's Candela, or there's a number of different versions that are out there. But foiling in general, smart foiling in general.
It's like a hydrofoil, right?
It's like a hydrofoil, but it's not the V-shaped kind of static wings we used to see. The foils now are often T-shaped or H-shaped, and they have lots of little changes they're doing every second. That's all computer controlled. And we had Gustav Hasselskog talk at one of our events earlier in the year at Discover Maritime Futures, and he was saying that he needed 50 engineers to build the Candela C8, which is his first kind of production vessel. They were creating their own PCB boards. They had sensors all up and down the vessel. They had to invent new ways of doing propulsion. That level of technology, it's really smart, gives you a really good result. It also means you got a more expensive product.
What about this everyday speedboards, little fishing boards, the little dinghies, and all of those with an offboard motor? It can be very easily latch into one of the offboard motors and there you go, no?
There's definitely outboard motors that are coming that are offering greater amounts of performance. At the moment, they're known for being quite small, little, so you might use them in a tender on a yacht and you putter along at 2 or 3 knots and go basically just getting around. It's okay. But what we're saying is bigger and bigger motors are coming. Nort, who I know Danny Kennedy mentioned, I think in one of your podcast episodes, Nort is in New Zealand. They're doing quite large outboards. Their desire is to give you a large, chunky outboard that have got a big vessel up to plane quite quickly, a relatively big boat up to plane quite quickly. What we find is the outboard's not the problem. The outboards are heavy. Don't get me wrong. It's if you put an electric motor in one of these outboards, they weigh a ton. But it's usually the battery weight, and the battery is usually separate on any sizable installation. And that, again, it depends on the boat, depends on what you're using the boat for and how you're using the boat. In general, they're pretty safe and they're very easy to use. You just plan to put it under your seat or plan to put it on the bottom of the boat somewhere. We knew a commercial operator that was looking at putting 3 large Evoy boards on the back of his boats, which are 40-foot long ribs. And we were wondering what he'd do if the 300 kilograms of battery that he'd have to add. And he hummed and hawed for a bit and he said, I have got 300 kilograms of lead weight in the ballast of the boat. Okay, great. Throw away the lead weights, put in the battery, you're good to go. And that's definitely something that happens, is something people are interested in. But it is still early days. And so for commercial operators, they care about maintenance and they haven't learned by word of mouth things maintain well. And for recreational operators, it is just a cost. It's a cost to get into. I do think there's a V2G story to be told there. If you think about vehicle to grid, vessel to grid, I think is even better. If you have an electric jet ski or a sizable electric outboard on your boat and it's a trailerable boat, so that you just store the trailer at home, perhaps next to a house. If you plug that into your house, that could be a 60 kilowatt hour battery or an 80 kilowatt hour battery. And at that point, that's a very nice size battery. I think we called it the Fun Powerball. So it's like having a Powerball, buying a Powerball, but it's actually fun. You can take it out occasionally. And unlike a car, you're not using it as often, so you don't worry as much about the battery going up and down. It's not as big a deal. You're using it once every couple of weekends. So it's not a big problem. So I think that might help too when people realize they can do that with boats.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, you can also literally jet ski to and rescue someone else running out of power if you have
You could.
as autonomous. Wow. Okay, sending a 60 kilowatt hour at jet ski speed.
There's some big jet skis coming that are battery ones, but I think they look like small boats. Big jet skis are small boats anyway, actually. You can see them afloat.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just intrigued. That looks like then the boat industry is where maybe electric vehicles was about 15 years ago, 2010, where all the sort of high-end cars getting converted, or the collectibles were getting converted to electric because it was so expensive, safety, people could do fancy stuff. Looks like that's where the boats are here, very high-end, super safe.
I think it is very much like that. I think the advantage the boats have is when the shift comes, it'll be quite quick. So we're really waiting on car batteries are already pushing where we'd like them to be. If you could give us a battery that was passively cooled, so we don't need to have pumps that are pumping gel or pumping water around, that straight away simplifies what the battery has to do, simplifies where you can put the battery, and you can start to put it in interesting places, right? So you could put it in the keel of a sailboat. So the sailboat keel could be the battery. And if it's much safer, so if you do have an accident, it's not likely to go into thermal runaway, and therefore you're immediately in a much safer position, then safe passively cooled batteries will create a massive opportunity, I think, in boating. But the industry is slow to get their heads around what to do. There's all sorts of places we can put batteries in boats that people haven't thought of putting batteries. Along the keel of the boat's a great place to put the battery because it is kind of low in the boat. It's meant to be where you want to put the weight. And there are certainly some designers that are starting to think about this. But at the moment, the big commercial boats, they have a battery room. Like they're still thinking of them like engines, and they're not passively cooled. There's a great photo of Incat Tasmania's Hull 96, the Chinazarilla, which is a 130-meter long electric ferry. So it's massive.
Yeah, that's one of the largest.
I walked along it when it was being built, and it is like huge. The battery was massive, but there's a great photo of someone standing in the battery room, and all you can see is these colored fans pointing towards the person, because that face side of every battery has got a fan that's cooling it. Now that's active cooling that's going to be a problem. Those fans are going to break. There's something to go wrong. If something gets on board the ship, like rats or something else, and it gets in that location, there's something that could crawl in there. Insects, it's Australia, so things crawl in there. There's all sorts of places where like things could go wrong. What we're looking, I think, in the future is batteries where you don't have to inspect them. You don't have to worry about them. You can build them into the structure of the boat and rely on them lasting for the lifetime of the boat, lasting for 20, 30 years. And if you do have to replace them, fine, it's a major deal to replace them, but it's because you did something wrong. It's not because they had an end of life 5 years later. So it is interesting. We do see when you do the commercial modeling, they model replacing the batteries after 10 years. I'm not sure they'd actually need to do that, but we haven't learned yet what the batteries really respond like in production. With electric cars, we're starting to see that, hey, some of those early Priuses, which are not actively cooled batteries and not particularly well built compared to today, have still got great state of charge, and they're still doing quite well. So maybe we're going to find that the economics change because the reality might be we don't need to replace things as much. And to give you an example, a diesel engine that goes to a big ferry, if it's running kind of 12 hours a day, most of the year long, it'll be replaced after 5 years. They'll take the entire engine out and put a whole new engine in. So they designed these boats to be able to get the engines in and out, because every 5 years you have to toss away the engine. Now that's crazy, right? Talk about recycling problems. There's not a lot of great recycling that happens to those engines. They tend to end up in kind of scrapyards gathering dust. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities of electrification to really change the way that works, but we don't know yet.
I was recently in Mongolia, and to make your point about this all sort of Toyota hybrid cars. There's 250,000 of them, maybe even more. Every third car is a Toyota Prius, and they're doing it extremely well under extreme cold temperature when sort of diesel freezes -30, -40. And people are getting way more longer life than they originally expected. So economics have changed, and then, of course, more and more people are buying them. These are not plug-in hybrid. These are still like a proper hybrid, meaning diesel or gasoline is actually producing the electricity. But the economics looks very good. So I hope that happens in the boats.
I think one of the nice things about boats, if you think of recreational boats, if you go look at a marina, at a typical marina, every berth will have a 240-volt power supply that you can plug in your boat and charge your kind of battery, normally a lead acid battery. That'll trickle charge a lithium ion battery quite nicely over a couple of weeks. So if you've gone and used your boat's big battery, you come back and you plug in the trickle charge, 2 weeks later, you've got plenty of charge. And those boats don't go out every week. They might in summer, but not definitely in winter. And then you look at what happens if you have to fuel your boat. Well, there's 1 or 2 fuel docks that marina might have access to that you've all got to queue up for on the weekend to get your boat fueled. You don't want to leave your boat full of fuel sitting there. You fill it up when you need it to if you're going to leave it for long periods of time. And so actually batteries might be more convenient. They might make the whole experience much nicer just going down to your boat. And one of MERC's members, Go Boat, they specialize in these little hire picnic boats that are battery operated, have nice electric motors on the back. They only do about 3 or 4 knots, so that it's very hard to get into trouble. Basically, they've got a picnic table in the middle that you can seat 10 people around. They've got a bimini cover on top to keep you shaded from the sun. And they're all located in beautiful locations. So there's one here in Sydney at Spit, down from the Muslim suburb. And you can go down there. It's at the Dalbora Marina. And you can rent a boat for a couple of hours and just explore these beautiful waterways. And the thing about an electric boat is there's almost no sound. So it's quiet. So what you get to hear is the water, the birds, the splash, people talking to each other, the noise of the stink boat when it rolls past you. But you suddenly get to understand that you can enjoy the waterways. You can enjoy being on the water. And I think there's a massive advantage coming. When we look at decarbonizing commercial craft, if you look at Australia, there's about $81 billion in value add from the marine industry outside of oil and gas. So oil and gas is huge. Most of that money doesn't stay here. You take the rest of it's 80 odd million, and there's 500,000 people employed. Right now, half of those numbers, so about just under 40 billion, in value add, and just under about 240,000 people are employed by marine tourism. So if you look at marine tourism, it's a massive business in Australia. It makes more money than the ports do, it makes more money than commercial fishing, makes more money than ferries do. And it's scattered around Australia. And fundamentally, what people are looking for is a great experience on the water. And one of the things that gets in the way of that great experience is diesel engines, because they're noisy, they vibrate, they create a lot of heat, they have a lot of smell that comes off of them, they put stuff in the water, so it's not nice swimming next to the boat. And so what you find is, as we start to electrify marine tourism, we're going to find that's going to become a compelling advantage, because people are going to look at those electrified boats and go, that one's quiet, and it's better for the environment that we're in. It's better for the Great Barrier Reef, and it's a nicer experience to be on. And so that's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, taking that point, I think in the sort of Asian context, I spent quite a bit of time in the Philippines. They have 7,000 islands and tons of boats. And they can easily put a outboard motor and turn them into electric, because it's a net oil importing country. And a lot of times I was told that the fishermen don't go out because you have to weigh out.
You have to spend money. It's going to cost me money to go out there. And
then how much I'm going to get. So I wanted to do a pilot. I'm still working a little bit more, that people say, oh, batteries are risky. Why don't you just have a floating thing by the side where the battery stays? You can seal it up as much as you want, if need be.
That's dangerous.
I know, but I'm saying if people really can just have a block that is sealed. And then exactly as you mentioned, these boats don't go as far, but don't go super fast at times. and it can trickle charge. Whole day sitting there. Sometimes they go nighttime fishing and they need lights to attract sometimes squids and others. All this can be done so cheaply. And if your incremental cost is not there, it's almost like a zero marginal cost operation because it's mostly solar, then you will go out much often. Because
another MERC member, E-Class Outboards, has done 2 trials, one in Africa, one in Solomon Islands. And what they do is they work with a solar power company. Solar power companies have a real problem in these places because often there is no electricity being used. So they come in and go, great, we're going to give you electricity. Everyone goes, great, I don't have a fridge. I don't have a TV. I don't have power tools. Why am I going to need to buy this electricity? Don't worry, it's only $1 a month. I can't afford $1 a month, forget it. And so they have this real problem. What do? They're trying to get these people to electrify, but people don't see a reason to. Why am I going to put a fridge in a house that leaks? The fridge is going to get wet. It's going to get destroyed. It's a very expensive thing. I'm not going to do that. There's lots of basic needs that need to be met. What they worked out was the solar power company can buy the batteries, which is the most expensive part of electrifying. They charge the batteries. They have the power. It's easy for them to do, cheap for them to do. The fishermen will electrify their outboards. So they will get their outboards converted. E-Class does conversion kits. So they can keep the leg and they keep the case. So they just send the motor and a few bits and bobs, change the existing outboard motor over to being an electric one. And instead of a fuel tank, they have a connection to a battery. And in the battery, they rent from the solar company. So now I'm renting batteries instead of buying petrol. I'm using locally sourced energy, not energy that's been shipped around the world. And I'm in a position where if I choose to do very well, if I happen to do very well and I choose to want to own the battery myself, I can buy the battery myself. So if someone's a bit of an Uber fisherman, a bit of an entrepreneur, they might end up going and saying, I'm going to get a loan, micro loan, to buy the battery. I'll have my own battery, and that's I'll get some solar panels. And then we'll start to see that they've got value from electrification. They've got value from that electricity. And then it flows over to other things. That, I think, that's huge. The other one that's huge is, of course, solar power. So if you're not going very fast, you're just puttering along, then solar power on a boat is a reasonable option. I think a Swedish electric boat company, and they just did a trial in their summer season where they did, I think it was 6 or 7 days travel nonstop around the archipelagos there, using just the power of the sun to keep the boat going. So didn't have to buy any power. Started with a full battery. Let's be fair, we started with a full battery, but they kept it going for 7 days. They did, I think, 600 kilometers or something, some huge amount of travel. And it was a great example of, if you're not trying to be super fast, actually a small amount of electricity gets you a long way. A small amount of any sort of energy gets you a long way on water. And so there's, I think, a lot of those places, the fishermen don't have to travel very fast. And there is all those advantages of being able to have silent power when you're out at sea, like being able to turn lights on and know that you're not starting up a generator to make it happen, which means you're less likely to scare fish away.
Yeah. All these things are happening in the developing countries, rich countries, like it was happening with the electric vehicles initially, while China did a revolution of 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers. Right now, the trucks are finally coming. So in the boat scene, I guess the ferries are your trucks or big lorries and the commercial vehicles. But this little 2- and 3-wheeler equivalent, which would be a sort of little fishing boat somewhere in Asia, I'm just still intrigued that they are not happening in a big way. I'd like to get some of this, your connection about the African projects and to understand a bit more. I think battery as a service that you mentioned, maybe can have a range of battery swapping at the sort of on the ground. So you pick up a battery, plunk it in, pay X dollars for the couple of hours. You don't own anything. You do your round, put it back. That's it. You don't have to buy petrol or an edit to be way cheap.
Yeah, it certainly is a possibility. And it's one of those things what they tell you when you buy an expensive luxury battery and electric outboard is they say, look, if you have range anxiety, if you've got a range problem, like you suddenly realize the battery's down to 20% or 10%, you're miles away from home, just drive really slowly home. and the battery will last a really long time. And so that's not always possible in a car. Like in a car, you can't hop on it. Nobody lets you do that. But on a boat, that's possible, right? There's times when the current's against you, the wind's against you, and that maybe doesn't work. But by and large, it's possible to limp home. So it's actually quite good for people. I think it's a good, solid thing. It is one of those things, like I said, these are places often where electrification hasn't come. Maybe people have a light bulb at home. Maybe they've got a solar powered light source at home in some of these places. And I'm thinking places in Indonesia, places in even the Pacific Islands. There's often remote places where they got no refrigeration, where actually the first refrigeration should be communal. Maybe there should be a communal ice shed or freezer shed or fridge shed, and that's run by solar panels. And, you can share access to it. Like it doesn't have to be, we don't have to jump people into the 1950s kind of full-on Jetsons moment. I don't know that it's always good for them. And it's also not always the most appropriate way to help people. But there's certainly ways you can think outside the box. And I think electrification, the beautiful thing about it is it does democratize access to energy. There's so many ways you can create you can have a stationary bike hooked up as a generator and have people hop on it and pedal to create electricity. You can do it from wind power. You can do it from solar. The beautiful thing about electrifying stuff is that you suddenly get sources of energy that come from all sorts of places, and you're not reliant on someone digging this sticky mess out of the ground, refining it in some far off country, shipping masses of it to your country, and then it being distributed by trucks everywhere. And you're waiting to see the fuel truck arrive to know that you've got fuel for that month. It's a different way of operating. And I think it's going to be much better for people.
Yeah, ideal, exactly as you mentioned, rather than importing this oil from far away. If you're a fisher person, you went for a fishing, technically you should be able to roll out that I'm quietly fishing a big floating solar. You open it up, roll it out, you fish for a couple of hours, charge your battery, come home.
I like the idea.
Connect your boat to your house.
Nice and easy. There's certain, one of the things you learn about the maritime field is that the sea is a really nasty monster when it comes to chewing up metal and other things, just because it's salty and because it's wet and lots of organic matter floating around in it. So it's a nice idea. Getting things robust enough that works. I don't know that it's going to work for your average fisherman, but it's certainly, I think certainly one of the things we might get to is maybe there's a charging buoy halfway to the fishing grounds. And the charging buoy has wave energy or solar energy collectors or wind energy collectors where it is. And so I can stop and get a fast charge. Maybe I pay something for it. Maybe it's a free thing if you're a fisherman. You want to professionally build these things is what I'm saying.
You can pick up a recharge battery and plunk it in.
Yeah. And there's definitely options of doing things like this that currently we don't look at. I think if I take a far future view and I go, there's problems of sailors not getting enough time off boats. And there's lots of docks in the world where when the sailors try and get off, if they're on a container vessel and they try and take shore leave, they don't get allowed to leave. People say it's too busy. The dock's too busy. You can't unload here. And people get denied shore leave for months at a time, years at a time sometimes. And so there's an inherent problem with that, which is you need to give your crew shore leave. But if we could find a way to say, here's a place in the Solomon Islands, which is ideally located between Australia and China. And when ships go through there, if they need to charge, there's a charging zone they can stop and charge at. They can have a buoy and charge at. And boats will come and pick up sailors and take them to an area that is fenced off from the mainland, so they're not able to jump ship and become illegal immigrants. But they can enjoy being on land. There's things for them to do. There's opportunities for them to engage in stuff that they find hard to do when on board a ship. Just lying on grass underneath a tree, you can't do that on a ship. That sort of thing, that sort of exercise would be awesome to see. And it would completely change the way we think about these things. Because at the moment, shipping relies on a few major hubs to do bunkering at. And so you look at Singapore. Singapore has major refineries there. Why does it have refineries there? It doesn't have any source of oil because all the oil gets shipped in and then it gets refined and then it gets fed to all the vessels that are stopping there. What happens in the future where those vessels don't need to bunker so much? Or maybe they need to bunker more often and they can't get to Singapore. They've got to bunker before they get there. I think there's a lot of opportunity for electrification to offer new ways of people thinking about how to get electricity onto boats in order to power. So I think that's very exciting.
Yes, it is. I think the electric vehicles are competing with gasoline vehicles. So that's why the implied price, battery price in a car is much cheaper than a home batteries, as we have all learned. So eventually that battery price, a low battery price will trickle into the home batteries. That's slowly happening. So if it starts trickling into, with all the safety thing that you mentioned, into sort of electric boards, it should happen much quicker than what it took the electric vehicle, right? So it's the same thing.
And I think the exciting thing is, if we look at ports, for instance, ports currently don't really think of themselves as energy hubs, despite the fact when you get to a port, you might bunker fuel and you might therefore put fuel on board your boat. That's not how they see themselves. But in an era when we want ships to be using shore power, if they're dirty powered ships, or to be charging if they're electrical ships, that's a huge amount of power. So it's something like one of our members, Cavitec, did a presentation at a conference a little while ago, and they were saying it's your average cruise ship is 16 to 20 megawatts of power.
Mm-hmm.
That's the draw of how much power. That's a fair-sized town. So when they cruise up and they go, put me on shore power, they actually plug 4 cables this big.
Yeah, there'll be multi-megawatt.
Multi-megawatt. And so they're getting like 4 or 5 megawatts per cable of power shoved into the ship. So they can afford to turn the engines off, but still keep the air conditioning on, all the bits and pieces that people have. People can still iron their shirts. The restaurants are still cooking and they're still processing waste. They do amazing things on board those ships with processing their own waste. So all of that stuff, all that machinery still needs to function while they're at dock. And I think what we'll start to see is ports stepping up and going, well, actually, let's get on the front foot about this. The best ports are the ones that are going to go, okay, we're going to own this. We're going to have a massive bank of batteries here. We're going to have connections to renewable energy offshore or onshore, wherever it is. And we're going to start to be proactive about electrifying. And I think that starts with electrifying their workboats, their tugs, the rope handling boats, the small boats that you see zipping around a port that aren't very noticeable. And then it moves up to bigger and bigger ones, to then offering shore power for ships for temporary time. And then I think what we'll see is the ports will say, maybe I need 20 megawatts for the cruise ship while they're here, but the cruise ship's only here for 20 days of the year. The other 340 days of the year, I don't have a cruise ship to supply. But I've got the batteries and I've got the power supply here. So actually, maybe I'm going to go into the grid and I'm going to offer my batteries to the grid, because I know when my boats are coming in, I know when I'm going to need to reserve power. Maybe I should actually own the power supply, own this battery. And I think that'll be interesting to see ports. This is what I'll say, Port of Melbourne, Port of Newcastle, they're big. They might become big energy players in the areas in which they're in. It has happened a little bit in the past. I think that there was a story told to me once about, I think it was Christchurch in New Zealand back around the year 2000. And they had a major outage because of an earthquake, I think. And they were running the ship's engines on the ships in port, and the ships in port were powering the town. So actually, they were getting electricity off the ships onto the town. I think we might start to see that happening more. That might become the reason you want to go live near a port, is the port has so much energy that energy's cheap there. That might be a really cool thing.
Yeah. So what do you do when you're not thinking about boats and others? What do you do for fun?
I sail boats.
Lovely.
So my favorite thing to do is actually, I have a friend who has a part share of a boat. So if he says, Angus, do you want to come sailing? I put my hand up and say, yes. I did the Sydney Hobart race when I was 16. So they don't let you do it at 16 anymore. And I can understand why. It's pretty traumatic, but it was a great experience. There's something wonderful about being out in the water. And sailing boats are lovely because they're quiet and you're so close to the water. You can hear everything. The hassle of sailing boats is you have to know how to sail, and there's a lot of equipment. It's very expensive. I think that's one of the things electrification is going to challenge. Actually, I think we'll see less sailing boats being sold and more people buying boats that are just motorboats, but they're quiet motorboats. So that'll be interesting. I like to cook. So actually, I explained to you before, I was making crepes for my daughter. I'm the only one who likes making crepes for her. So I like to cook. That's what I like to eat as well. And other than that, just I think being out in nature, and I'm a sci-fi geek too.
Huh?
That's why I get excited about technology. I think I had that buzz from it being a young kid.
Yeah. All the science fights are becoming a real slowly. It's unbelievable. A lot of Star Trek stuff are real. Computer, tell me this, right?
Yeah. I'm still waiting for the computer knowing when I'm talking to it, when I'm not talking to it. It's always amazing how the computer in Star Trek instantly replies and knows when you're talking to it. When you're not talking to it, it knows not to reply.
Yes, absolutely. So how can people reach you? What's the best way?
So if you want to come, if you go to merc.blue, that's our web domain. That's probably the best place to get us. On there, you'll see more about the MERC community. We have 34 organizations in it at the moment. And you'll see about our events. We just ran a conference last week called Discover Maritime Innovations. So we have 2 Discover Maritime events that we run, Futures and Innovations. And we had about 100 people. Really interesting, looking at what's happening with what's coming up. So you can reach me through the website. That's the best place to go. You can look me up online on LinkedIn, but Angus McDonald's a little bit of a common name. So there's 1,000 in Australia that you'll find invaluably come my area. So merc.blue is probably the best place.
Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you want to share? I learned so much from you. Yeah, it's a field I don't know much.
Well, I actually wanted to ask you a question, Sahai, which is, what got you into being an energy entrepreneur?
I used to work for the State Electricity Commission of Victoria. I come from the energy sector, and I have met with a lot of policymakers, senior officials, and entrepreneurs, startup. I always wanted to do something on my own. I took an early retirement and then said, okay, let me get into this startup scene. So I'm trying to invest here, putting ideas there, putting things together. And especially this podcast started. I was walking through Melbourne and all these kids were on the street talking about climate change. And I asked one of them, where do you get information from? Saying our school teacher. Then I was saying, I just came from one of those UN COP meetings. So why can't I start sharing, talking to people so that these young people have access to recent information? So that was the inspiration. So now I'm a mixed bag. I do a bit of photography. I do a little bit of entrepreneurship here and there. I've got a few investments. I do this podcast and learn from people like yourself. So that's been fantastic.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you. It's been great fun. Thank you for taking the time. And I'll probably be one of your regular podcast listeners, I'm sure.
Thank you so much, and really learned a lot. I'll connect with you for more information later on. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Sahai.
Thank you.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energypreneurs. If you enjoyed this, don't forget the full video is on YouTube.
Just search Energypreneurs.
Thank you. See you next time.